Paul Signorelli. I want to welcome you to the Information Gone Wild podcast that is brought to you by the San Jose State University iSchool.
And I'm Esther Nawar, and in this podcast, we discuss all things information science with our noted guests, and today we're very fortunate to have with us Becky Calzada, Jonathan Hunt, and kathylester. Becky Calzada is the District Library Coordinator from Texas ISD, the 2425 AASL, the American Association of School Librarians Division of ALA President. Jonathan Hunt is San Diego County Office of Education Library Media Services Coordinator and the San Jose State University iSchool School Library Coordinator. kathylester is an adjunct faculty at Wayne State University School of Information Sciences and a retired school librarian for 23 years. And the AASL past president 2022-2023.
Well, Becky, Jonathan, Kathy, we're all delighted to have you here with us to talk about what you are seeing in school and academic libraries. To kick us off, what brings you happiness?
I think the things that bring me happiness are being surrounded by family, just family time. I've got grandkids, I have dogs and granddogs, and so those are things that just kind of fill up my bucket. And I think also just friends, family, that sort of thing too. So
I also was going to say that spending time with friends and family is really important to me, but I also find happiness in exploring new ideas and also exploring new places. I like to travel when I can. So those also bring me happiness.
I was going to piggyback and say very similar things, family and vacation with family. So I'll go into professional happiness. So children's literature, I have a deep and abiding passion and love for children's literature. So anytime my professional life intersects with children's literature, then it brings me great joy.
Let's build on that for all three of you and start off with a real basic question about how each of you became involved in school librarianship or academic librarianship.
School librarianship is a second career for me. I actually was a computer engineer at a small software company in Ann Arbor, and I was volunteering on the technology committee in my son's school district. And the tech committee was basically all of the school librarians in the school district. And when one of them was retiring, she said to me, "Kathy, you would be great at this job. Did you ever consider doing this?" And I'm like, what would I have to do? So I went back to school to Wayne State University and got my master's in library science and started working. My first school library job was in 2001. And I never looked back. I really enjoyed it and never regretted making the switch.
So for me, I was the first grade teacher for the first, I think, 8 years of my teaching career. And in Texas, you have to be a teacher before you can become a school librarian. And so I worked in a school that had a school librarian. And I think the librarian, I just remember she noticed that I loved books. I would check out tons of books. I would bring the kids to the library often. I mean, I had a really rich, print-rich library in my classroom before it was like the thing. And she said, "Have you ever thought about becoming a school librarian?" And I didn't even know that was a possibility. And I think more so just because I'm a first generation, like high school and college graduate in my family. And so she took me to Sam Houston State University author fair, featured an author. And so that was back in the 80s. And I got to meet like Tommy DePaula, which was pretty amazing. And that kind of set me on my path. It just kind of planted the seed. But it wasn't until 1997 that I actually, when I moved to Austin, the Austin area, decided to go to school and get my master's earlier than I thought. But I went ahead and got it and went to the iSchool here in UT and got my master's degree. And so that kind of got me into the library role. And then eventually, 14 years ago, I became a library coordinator because I think leadership is a big passion part for me. So just always looking for mentor leaders in my life. And this just seemed to be a natural step for me in my work as a librarian.
And like Becky, I started off as a classroom teacher. I taught fifth grade, and as a very brand new teacher, I kind of went back to what some of my formative experiences were and what I loved. And one of the things that I loved was I had teachers that read aloud to me. After we would come in from recess, we'd put our heads on the desk and she would read a book, The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander, or, Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing by Judy Blume. And so I had all these wonderful memories. And so I wanted that for my students. So I went back and started reading a lot of great children's books. And, I went through like all the book lists I could find, the Newbery, the Caldecott. I was just reading like crazy. And I finally got up to the point where I was reading contemporary things as they were being published. I found an independent children's bookstore. I really just I got fascinated with the Newbery Medal. And I started to realize that, horror of horror, they were often picking the wrong books. So I thought, I can do a better job than this. Somebody needs to, so I need to get on this committee and set things right. So I joined ALA as a teacher with no intention necessarily of becoming a librarian, because I didn't see a pathway there. Elementary schools in California are notorious for not having teacher librarians. So this was just to indulge my book award passion. My first committee was Popular Paperbacks from YALSA, not really a glamorous committee. But my second one, I happened to meet a friend, somebody like friends in high places. So I made a connection whose college roommate became the president of the division that got to make the appointment. So I found myself on the Newbery committee as my second award committee. And so then it was all about networking and everything. But in the meantime, I switched districts to one that had teacher librarians in middle school. I was working in a middle school rather than elementary school. And I saw this as a career pathway for me. And so then I enrolled and became a teacher librarian. But this was in the Central Valley. I had moved from the Bay Area to the Central Valley. And they were getting ready to eliminate positions in my school district. And they gave us a year's warning. And since I was pushed out during the Great Recession for a couple of years, I did not want to have that experience again. So I was looking around and saw some jobs down south and asked my wife where she wanted to live. And she said San Diego out of all the other places. And so I've been here ever since, 10 years in in a role where we support the 42 local school districts.
Jonathan, I just want to piggyback on what you said. For many of our students, they wonder about how you make your way through the bureaucracy that exists out there and different things. You talked about how you joined one committee that led to another. It was people you knew. As a hint to all of you, the students that are watching this, it starts with the people you know, and it starts with hanging on to those people and making yourself available, as you've just heard from all three of our guests today.
And Paul, one thing I also want to echo is most of the people that work in the library profession, starting from school librarians to all the way to academics and public and even corporate librarians, mostly none of them have really discovered the profession until they actually started doing something else. And then they fall in love with it and they end up in library school. So this is something for everybody to consider, that we're very lucky that we were able to find our passion, because I have a very similar story. I actually graduated from business school, and then I fell in love with libraries when I started my work at the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. But that brings me to our next question is, what is a typical day in your library setting as a school librarian or a school library administrator?
Well, I can talk about my perspective as being a building school librarian. I worked as a middle school librarian, so I've always been in a single building at a middle school level. And honestly, I did not have a typical day. No day looked exactly the same. And that's one of the things I really loved about the profession. Was some days I would be teaching, collaborating with classroom teachers on teaching information literacy lessons, or teaching digital citizenship skills, or teaching technology skills. I'd partner a lot with teachers on projects where I would teach the tech portion of the project and the teachers would teach the content portion. I'd spend some of my time promoting books and having kids in the library and doing book talks or book tastings and working around books and selecting books. And other parts of my days were spent finding resources for teachers. So they, for their teaching and their curriculum, connecting with them, and just also running various clubs with students. I had reading clubs. I did a Girls Who Code club. I did a making club. And so I had a maker space and maker activities that I would open at various times. So it really was quite varied and never the same. And that's something I really enjoyed about my job.
I'll piggyback on Kathy because I'm not in a library. I worked in a library for a time, but I definitely agree. That's some of the things that I hear about from the librarians that I get to oversee. As a district library coordinator, there is no like typical day in that it's the routine piece of it all, which is what I love. There's just always something different. I think there's a lot of things that are pretty cyclical. So for instance, we just started school 12 days ago. So we are, I'm right now kind of navigating the purchase of district resources that we pay at the district level on behalf of librarians and school libraries and that sort of thing too. Today I was talking to a principal because we have to do some hiring. We had a resignation just come out of the blue that happens sometimes. And so being that partner with him or her to, check in to see like what are they seeking for in terms of very specific qualities, but also sharing, the expectations that we have for our librarians, the program that we have, because it's also an opportunity to see what they know about what school librarians do, because oftentimes there's not an understanding and perhaps they're not maximizing that role and that sort of thing too. I do, right now we're doing a lot of work around new collection development policies that were implemented in the state. And so kind of looking at that and thinking about how we need to educate our administrators and librarians too, but just so that we have a very consistent system in terms of how we are dealing with and working with parents and partnering with them and disseminating information. And so, there's also the whole, like, we're going to collaborate with curriculum people. There would be weekly standing meetings sometimes with, my team and that sort of thing too. So there's never the same day, but what I can say is there are what I call yearly things that I do that I have as a sort of like a year at a glance. And so if I look at September, here are sort of the things I'm going to be doing and can always just use that as a way to make sure that I don't miss anything throughout the whole school year. So
I also have an incredibly varied day. We have 42 local school districts here. I have contracts with 30 of them that don't have a teacher librarian. So I'm called their librarian of record. It's really a consultant position. So on any given day, I could be in one of those 30 districts. And we have a wide range from, urban to suburban to rural. So I could be in a district, in a site, at a site. I could also be emailing back and forth or in phone calls. I could be in regional or statewide collaborative meetings, either online or in person. I'm broadcasting live from the Learning Resources Display Center, which houses all of the textbooks that have been adopted by the State Board of Education. So this is a place where districts can come and review textbooks before they make a decision. So it's kind of ironic that at the site level, textbooks has become, one of the job descriptions that is, one of the things that's been added to our plate increasingly over the last decade or two, and it doesn't change up at this level. I'm involved in a couple of federal grants. I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, other duties is assigned, pulled in a thousand different directions. But I think that's also true of the site and the district level as well. So I think that's probably something we all have in common.
It does sound like the variety of every day from your various perspectives and jobs is the pleasure of your job, that it isn't the same every day. which is a good thing. And I hope our students and those listening understand that that's a really good thing to have, that it's not all one thing, and your different backgrounds before you came to school libraries helps to be able to deal with all those things. That being said, what are some of the greatest challenges facing school and school library administrators?
There's a lot depending on where you are and where you live and work. I know we have challenges around, first of all, it's just attracting people into this profession. I have 45 librarians that are on my team, but I know that there are many places in Texas and probably beyond that don't have certified librarians. And I know we hire people that aren't fully certified, but we also hire typically with the condition that they're going to go to library school, or some have already started, so they're within a program, because that is important and it is a priority for our school district. So I think there's the attracting people, and I think that the current climate with book challenges, especially in Texas, is a challenge. I know I have several, I'm connected with a lot of library schools here in the state, and we have quite a few, and they've mentioned that the enrollment is down, and I think some of it is because of just the fear of what's happening on the intellectual freedom front. And then finally, I think another challenge is just the understanding of what the role of the school librarian is. We've got a lot of places, especially in our state, with funding. One of the first positions to go is the school librarian position, but some of that is also tied to the fact that there's not a requirement to have a school librarian in the state of Texas. I often wonder that if that is a position that is cut, is it because there's not an understanding of the role and how they're maximizing that role? Because I will say, I love to be behind the desk checking out a book, but that can't be the bulk of our work, right? So I think if we're not maximizing the role in terms of being that co-teacher, coach, helping maybe an instructional coach to coach new hires, being that thought partner with the teacher to, lead some lessons and partner in lesson design. I always tell my people, we have to seek the entries, so where are the opportunities? And so asking about what are the challenges the teacher has, what are the challenges that an administrator has, so that we can help support in that work and be a critical part of the team so that we become indispensable. I tell my librarians all the time that if somebody were to say, we're going to cut the school librarians in your school, who's going to come running down the hallway to say, no, you can't, because this person does this and this and this? I said, and I would expect many people doing that for our librarians, because we're doing a lot of those roles that are specific to the job description and the degree that we have in both a master's and a bachelor's.
So my perspective, I'm been involved in advocacy work, both in my state and the federal level as well. And so from that perspective, the current climate with intellectual freedom and challenges, I think it's not just in Texas, and Becky knows this, it's really nationwide. And some states like mine in Michigan, it's more localized. We're not having negative legislation coming from our state legislature, at least at this point. But we are having some really hard fights locally, and librarians being doxxed, I would say, and called all the names and things like that. So that's an important challenge right now in our profession. Another challenge is just the idea of the equity of access to school librarians. In Michigan, we're 46th in the nation in terms of the ratio of school librarians for students. So this is something that I've been working on for a long time, because I feel like it is doing such a disservice to our students. The students that would need those services the most are typically the least likely to have the services. And then because of that, though, because there hasn't been a lot of support, like Becky said, bringing people new into the profession is still a challenge, both because of maybe fear right now because of the climate, and then also wanting to come into the profession with the perspective of being able to get a job, that they want to spend that money on that degree and then be able to find a position somewhere. So those are some things that I see in my state.
I'm not really seeing anything different. Certainly at the site and district level, we've had our share of book challenges here in San Diego County. It peaked a little bit last year. Things started to calm down, and most of our challenges tend to be around LGBTQ rather than critical race theory. But we have some very conservative pockets in our county where the fires are still burning out there. So that's definitely a concern for us. Another concern that we've had coming out of the pandemic is many of our districts and schools had gone one-to-one devices before, but not really a lot, and and certainly not all of them. Well, during the pandemic, you have all these devices, and somebody has to babysit the devices, and nobody planned very well for that. So that got dumped on library staff, and especially on library technicians. And so that has been, I have talked to a lot of site level folks that are really burnt out because they've been repurposed as these IT staff, and in the meantime, they're trying to run a library. So that's a concern that we're seeing a lot of here in this neck of the woods. I do agree from a big picture level. Money is always an issue. In California in 1978, we passed Prop 13 that gutted property tax revenues. And now we find ourselves 50th in terms of that teacher librarian ratio that Kathy was mentioned. And we're 50th by a lot. Like we would have to probably quintuple or something our numbers before we could try and pass Michigan on that list. So we're just abominable. But I think in some ways we can be the canary in the coal mine, right? Like there, but for the grace of God, go you if you don't learn the lessons that we're kind of going through here. And so, but I think that what's happened is kind of feeds into what Becky and Kathy were both saying, is that chronic underfunding for us has led to a lack of knowledge about what school libraries, and the problem is that everybody knows what a library is. Everybody's used the library, right? Multiple times, different types, academic, public, school. We all have stories about it and we love them. Everybody loves school libraries with their lips, but not with their pocketbooks. Yeah. And so the problem is designing school library experiences that impact academic achievement is a lot different than using the school library, right? So, I mean, it might look easy from the user perspective, but when you're designing and implementing, that's a harder thing to do. And so what it's led to is we have principals, we have district office staff, we have regional education staff that have never had the experience of a school library staff. And I'll just give you, if you look at my chain of command, my direct supervisor came from a district with no teacher librarians in it. So she, as a teacher, could not have had that collaborative experience of working with the teacher librarian. Her supervisor came from a district with no K-12 district, no teacher librarians. The assistant superintendent came from the second largest district that currently in California, which is San Diego Unified, and yes, I'm publicly shaming them here, they have one teacher librarian for the whole district.
Wow.
It's embarrassing. And then our brand new superintendent came from the largest elementary district in the state. They have 45 elementary campuses and not a single teacher librarian. So when you have this kind of, when you're swimming upstream, you know what I'm saying? So I know all those people use libraries and know libraries, but they've never, either as a teacher or as an administrator, coached or seen this. Or so the problem is they think they know school librarians because when you get to that level, the CEO level, you think you know everything, right? And you know a lot of stuff, right? You have a different perspective and you know a lot of stuff, but you don't know. So it's just, that's the kind of thing that people pretend like it's a money problem, but it's really a knowledge problem.
And you can't miss what you never had. And none
Right.
of these folks can really miss what they never had.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly right.
Now, Jonathan, you've done that article that we discussed via chat before this whole session. Our students deserve better than our woeful school libraries. And I know, Kathy, from what you were talking about, that your peers at Washington State University have praised you for your advocacy skills. I think a lot of students at San Jose State are picking up from Anthony there at San Jose State University that advocacy is an extremely important part of the work they do. And I don't think it's something that we have traditionally been looking at in library studies or in the library field. Let's start with Kathy because of that praise you got from Wayne State University. What are a couple tips you would offer to the students now to prepare themselves to be effective advocates, then open it up to the other two people in the conversation here?
Actually, I have written a few articles about that, and I think I linked them in our resources, but I do feel like everyone does need to advocate, whether it's for your own program. A lot of times school librarians will be singletons in their own building or whatever. So you want to center your advocacy around students. Like, what are you doing for students? You also want to align with the goals of your administrators, or, if you're advocating at the state level, align with state level goals for education or things like that, to make sure. And, for school librarians, there's literacy, there's information literacy, there's technology, there's all of those things. So we can we help social emotional learning. We really do a lot of different things. Like we said, we're a jack of all trades, but sometimes we need to modify that message depending on who our audience is, like who we're talking to. We also need to build relationships. So building those relationships with administrators in your district, if you're, advocating for a school level position, or again, if you're up at the district level, advocating at the district level, and then also then moving up the state level and things like that. So, and I have, part of my thing is there's 5 P's of advocacy: being polite, being present. So you have to show up, you have to do the work, be prepared. You have to kind of know what it is you're advocating for and have some information about that. Being positive, staying positive, and then also being persistent. I've been working in the state of Michigan since, I would say, 2013 with our legislature trying to get a requirement for school libraries and school librarians in our state. And I finally, this year, we have bills. Well, we've always had bills introduced, but this year we finally got a hearing on those bills, which was a major step forward. And last week I had a discussion with our state superintendent, about the Department of Education putting in funding request for school libraries. So that's the point of persistence. Like, it's never work that's done, it's always ongoing work. And I also wanted to mention the federal work. When I was AASL president, I worked with the offices of Senator Jack Reed and Representative Raul Grijalva on the Right to Read Act, which got introduced. And although it's called the Right to Read Act, the bigger part of that legislation is, again, putting language in the Every Student Succeed Act, essentially to require more equity around access to teacher librarians. And so I feel really proud about being able to work on that. And with the current House right now, like the US House, it's not going anywhere, right? But the fact that that language is there is really important. We've seen in the past that when there was language already there and then things turned around, or the Every Student Succeed Act needed to be reauthorized, that language got pulled in. So,
Thinking to Jonathan on the same thing of some tips on advocacy, but let's pick up where Kathy was, go back to a theme you mentioned on budgeting. What would you suggest to students and others in the field that they do to successfully advocate for budgets when that time of year comes around?
Well, I think I really like Kathy's strategy of aligning. You have to align what you want. So like what I hear from a lot of site people is, I want a book budget. Well, nobody wants to give you money for a book budget when there's no money to be had. So it has to be wrapped up in equity or universal design for learning or something that's more strategic that the site principal or the district administration is interested in.
Got it. And Becky, from your point of view, a couple tips on advocacy.
I think telling your story every day, often, whenever the opportunities are, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like to lots of people, but like what are those stories? I think also too, what speaks powerfully to advocacy is leveraging the people that you work with. So a librarian works with a teacher and encourages that teacher to say, can you just send a short email or some, what are the strengths and what are the reasons you wanted to partner? And then leveraging that to share with others so that now we have a teacher voice in the mix. And then again, how do you leverage the student voice too? There's I think it's important for us to engage our stakeholders in the work that we do. And so when we leverage their voice and share, how engaged they were in a lesson or what they liked about the library, whatever those opportunities are, but we can also use it to advocate for things that we need. So example, I had a high school librarian that was really wanting to do some redesign in her library, but she was looking for funding because furniture is expensive. And so she did a focus group with students, high school students, and asked them, what do you think our library needs? How do you think we could share? How can we ask? What could we tell people that want to help us? That what do they need to know? And so students talked about the chairs and how there weren't enough chairs. And then they said, let's take pictures of when we're all in here, because they were in there and there were kids on the ground and on chairs where there were, that kind of thing too. Needing more plugs because we had a lot more devices. And so that helped to get the advocation of some like money for like towers that, we could plug in, and even get more furniture. In fact, it got the whole school engaged, parents and that sort of thing, because what was great is that it was the student's voice that was sharing this, and they didn't do everything at one time, but over time, they were able to get more chairs. They were able to get more things. And it was because of the leveraging of the student voice. And so I think we have to not underestimate the power of that. And I also think too, when you add the reminder that the library has a potential to touch a school library, has a potential to touch every student on a school campus, every teacher. And when you break it down and do the math, you might be spending pennies for something that's going to be impactful for the entire school community if you really look at the budget and the numbers. And so I'm a big number cruncher. I don't mind advocating for a resource, furniture, whatever, but I do the math. I also shared the pictures of the old furniture. Pictures are powerful things. And so when you leverage that, it may not mean that you get it right away, but if you continue and you repeat your request, eventually and then you partner with, say, maybe an administrator or the students, that tends to come into play too. So you have to think about all the voices and get everybody at the table, because I think everybody wants to be fiscally efficient, and that's important. We're not going to keep buying a database because that's just always what we've done. If we don't have the stats, we don't have the circs or the hits, maybe it's time to rethink that. And so we have to really be doing that. And I think librarians are really good at being efficient in that way, but we do have to do the work, which means we have to run the reports. We have to help demonstrate the need and that sort of thing.
And Becky, I love that you actually used the word storytelling. And I think every single person in library school right now should take, I remember I graduated from San Jose State University in 2017. And I remember I took a course, and I can't remember the name of the professor, but she was amazing, the art of storytelling. And guess what? I actually became a fundraiser in addition to my role in the libraries. And I think everybody should be, whether you're still starting your library career all the way to being a district librarian or even a dean or a director of a library, you should be able to tell a story, and a picture, as you said, says many, many, many stories. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Actually, I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about the buzzword of the century, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think AI is taking over a little bit. So all of you that are fans of DEI, I mean, I think there's always a buzzword here and there, but and I handle all diversity, equity, and inclusion work here at the libraries, and I've been passionate about this work even before it was called DEI. And right now I'm on a mission to even no longer call it DEI because there's a stigma. But at the school level, and I know this is a little bit sensitive because you're talking to K through 12. I mean, I always tell my kids, diversify your sources, diversify your authors, diversify your publishers. Not necessarily, and of course topics. But some of these topics sometimes I'm speaking as a parent, not just as a librarian. Sometimes they're sensitive. Sometimes they're not ready for them. So maybe share with us like your tips and tricks, your stories with the DEI and how you serve your communities and schools with that concept.
Scholastic actually started doing some studies, but I wasn't really around the diversity in publishing.
The CBC, the Children's Book Council studies.
Yes, and it was Lee and Low. I think when Lee and Low partnered with them and started doing the infographics, and they showed like, this is how many books feature, are published or printed with white people and, people of color. And, they went all the down. And then, of course, we found out that there were more books about animals than there were about Black, Indigenous, people of color kind of thing. And so, I mean, I don't know if y'all remember that. We can probably put that in the show notes too, because I know they've evolved and stuff. But I really kind of started taking a deep dive in that personally. Because it's, I grew up in South Texas. My mom immigrated from Bolivia. My dad was born in Mexico, even though he was a citizen here. He was born there. But I know I didn't see myself in a book until I was in my 30s. And I didn't realize that it was a problem until I found a book, Too Many Tamales, and thought, oh my God, there's our family. Like, we're making tamales, right? So I understand the power that has, just to, a reader sees themselves in a book, but also know or recognize at that time that there was that lack of materials. And so helping to educate our librarians, it really kind of started there with, reading those studies, really thinking about the opportunities in terms of, creating displays, being like really intentional because, we all bring our own biases to the table and maybe we highlight our library loves and should we do that? So how do we like really kind of recognize that? And then I think also too, not just it within like the things that we share and curate, but even within us as individuals. And so can a student see themselves as a future librarian? So what does our library makeup look out, right? So we know there's a lot we can see within our professions and school librarians that we're predominantly white. So, what are we doing to recruit so that, children readers can see themselves in their librarian and see the possibilities. So whether it be about race or religion, like how do we recruit and make sure that we retain and are intentional about nudging people? And so I know I talk to my librarians annually. We talk a lot about, recruitment because at a minimum, we know that within our system as a school, the teachers know the work that our librarians do. And so it's not, hopefully they would never perceive that our job is like something that they want to kind of retire into because it's easy, because it's not. I tell our librarians and I tell anybody I'm interviewing principals that the librarian should be working just as hard, but I think even harder because you're overseeing, you're working with teachers, you're working with students, you're overseeing a program. So you should be working just as hard. It's not like a clock job where you like 8 to 5 and you're out, right? Or 8 to 4, whatever. So that said, who do they see? Because they see everybody. Who do they see within the ranks of their schools that have the potential, that have those qualities, that skill set, that mindset to be a librarian, a school librarian, but maybe they never thought about it. And so how do we nudge those people into considering this as a role? And we talk about how, we want to be inclusive. So who should we consider? maybe it'd be a male librarian. We have a male librarian, and not many people can say that, but I mean, we've had 2, even 3 up at one time. So I really like us to think about those things because I think it's important. It is important for us as a school district too. We do have a policy around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and an office that does a lot of training with that. So I always make sure, like, do we have some librarians at the table? Because I know they want to bring teachers there, and that's fine. But how do we also, because again, librarians see everybody, how can they be a partner on that team to help build understanding? Because they can be some of the constants because, they stay in that one role on the campus. So
I relate to what you said, that you didn't see yourself in the books, and you didn't. Well, what triggered me is like you didn't think that it was a problem. That reminds me with a TED Talk, and it's a very famous TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie from Nigeria about the danger of one single story. And I remember I listened to that TED Talk maybe in 2014, 2015, and it literally changed my life.
Yeah.
And I had already moved to the United States from Egypt, since 2002, and I never really thought about it until she articulated it very well. And I'm so glad to see the efforts. So how about Kathy and Jonathan? What kind of efforts and what other people in your district and schools are saying and doing for DEI?
I feel very fortunate that the district that I worked with in Michigan, Plymouth Canton Community Schools, was pretty diverse district, and our superintendent is an African American female. And so when I first moved to that district in 2013, we were already doing professional development around culturally responsive instruction or culturally responsive teaching, which we were calling CRT, which we then had to back up and call something different later, right? And and this idea about advocating, I had been advocating for a book budget. And when we had on our school improvement plan, the plan that we needed to support diverse learners and support this culturally responsive instruction. Again, that was a way that I could go in and align, and say, hey, I could diversify the library and support this goal of our school and our district if I had a budget, and so was able to get a budget that way. So that is one district in our state. And again, being involved at the state level, we do have other districts in our state where they cannot use the word diversity, but we're still working on it. And our state association has a committee called Myself in Books, and it's the take on the MI from Michigan, but also like seeing yourself in a book. And the committee meets all year long, and at our conference every year, we announce the new list, and it's, school librarians selected books best, most inclusive, and we're using that word about inclusivity instead of diversity, inclusive books that have been published in the last 2 years. And then we make that list available statewide and even nationwide, trying to encourage other school districts to support those diverse books. But it's not just about the diverse books. It is about that instruction as well, and celebrating all of the cultures within our schools and being responsive to all of our students. There's all the different sorts of diversity, whether it's religion, ethnicity, also disability, all of those different diversities we try to represent. So, and our state association also is trying to support that. AASL has a new book, Embracing Culturally Responsive Practice in School Libraries. And our association did a book study around that book. And we all, at the end of the book study, we had the author at a webinar. So again, we're trying to make sure that our practices are grounded really well and can support that diversity, equity, inclusion within our state, even if we might not we may use other terms to describe it in certain communities. We are trying to make sure we're supporting all of our learners.
I agree with Becky that those words have a taboo or a stigma in some places, and in other places they're almost like a cliche, like, oh, I hear that and I don't really have to engage with those concepts because we've been talking about that for the last decade or 5 years or whatever. So the new word or the new concept that my organization is really exploring is belonging. So it's been around for a while, and we've always been concerned about it in the field of education. We just don't use the word belonging. We call it other things like, school climate, or we talk about relationships or restorative practices or culturally relevant teaching, or, we call it a lot of different things. But I really like, the more that I have dived into this, like Kathy was saying, they've moved from like diversity to inclusivity. And I think belonging might even be a better word, because I think inclusive is always when you are included, you are dependent upon somebody including you. So there's always like a social power dynamic between groups. Whereas when you belong, like, this is my little tent, this is my place, I belong here, and I'm here at my own free will and choice, not because somebody allowed me to be here. So we've been studying the work of John Powell, who's a civil rights advocate, and he says, I really like his definition of belonging in the fullest sense of the word, is that you have to have agency to make choices, to participate actively, and in the fullest sense of the word, to be co-creators. It doesn't mean that you have to do that. You just have to have the opportunity if you so choose. So I have been thinking about that, like, how can we get our students and our families and our communities to co-create school library services with us so that they will feel that greater empowering sense of belonging?
Can I just also add too that I think, I do believe in equity, diversity, inclusion, but I also often wonder, I believe it should never be something that's done in isolation, and so that it's always embedded in all that we do. It's not an afterthought. It's also not a one and done, like, oh, we did that, let's move on kind of thing. Like, it is just, it's work that continues. Right. And I think, we don't talk enough about that, but I know that people will say like, oh, that's just a fad or whatever, like, because people think those things. And it's like, no, this is not, this is real world. This is ingrained. And I know it's a part of our system. Are we doing the best job? I wouldn't say we're perfect. I don't know that anybody is, but it is constant work, and it's work that we have to continue and bring people in as as people exit and bring new people in. We got to get them onboarded too, so they understand the vision and the expectation and what we need to do so that it lives within our system.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In the district I was in, although I moved there in 2013 and we were starting that work, when I retired very recently, we were still ongoing. We were still doing the work. It wasn't done. We had, different focuses and things like that. Jonathan, you brought to mind, I did have an article on belonging that I did use in my class I taught this spring with school librarians, preschool librarians. So I did pull in that article. So I do see that coming out more in the literature. So I really thank you for mentioning that.
I'll have to email you off list and see if I can get that and add that.
Okay. It might be one of the articles you already know, but I'll take a look. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I'm struck, I'll just give you a practical concern that we have here in California. So we have a very weird dynamic here in California, in that we have this group of teacher librarians. We have shrunk. So our professional organization has shrunk drastically in terms of the number of teacher librarians. And we are outnumbered, at least in some ways, by the classified library staff. And so the thing that's really interesting is if you look at the membership of the teacher librarians, it is overwhelmingly white, right? Overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly female, overwhelmingly old, right? Like all three of those. But the diversity is in those classified library technicians. That's where you see amazing, like, ethnic and racial diversity. And so there's always been this weird dynamic as we've lost teacher librarian positions. There was oftentimes animosity between the teacher librarian and the classified staff, almost like you're a scab, right? You're crossing a picket line to take my job. And that was never really the case, but we had a lot of people that felt it. When you lose your job, it's an emotional process, and you just, you just express anger in a lot of different ways. But I think one of the things that I'm really thinking about is we talk about diversifying, the teacher librarian group. And so the way that we need to do that is we need to find a way to build a bridge from our classified people, and not everybody's going to take it, but how can we provide opportunities and a pathway for somebody to become a library technician? Because in California, you have to have a bachelor's degree, and then you have to get a teaching credential, and then you have to get a teacher librarian credential. So it can be really daunting. And so what are some strategies or programs or policies that we can put into the state so that we can create that pipeline, and thereby diversifying the ethnic and racial and cultural and linguistic diversity of our teacher librarians?
Yeah, this is great. I'm just thinking of also what Becky said about how much librarians usually do. Like, we work a lot, and I think some people even ask me, like my kids and my husband, why are you so busy all the time? And because our jobs are multifaceted, and I think we do a lot, and we're also reimagining what we do in the age of technology. With that in mind, and because of a personal scenario that happened to me 5 years ago, because I was overworked and between kind of trying to balance work and life and kids, we decided to end the show with tips and tricks from what you do to maintain your own health and wellness.
I'm a list person, so I know that it's so easy to write a list of all the things you have to do, and but I also like to squeeze in like the things that I want to do. One of the things that I've done, it's been a few years now, I make a list of here maybe might be some work sort of things that I want to do. Here are maybe some house sort of tasks that you have around home, whatever. Maybe it's your car. But then I also have here are the fun things I want to do that are about me. And so I try to cross between the lists. And so I might say okay, I'm going to spend, set a timer and put, 2 hours for, work sort of things, because I know I might need to work a little over the weekend. And then really stick to it, put a timer on, and then I just step away. But then I'm going to go over to my I'm going to go for a walk or whatever those things are, might be I'm going to go get my nails done, self-care sort of things. But I also believe that, self-care, people think it has to cost money. You have to get a massage, that costs money. To me, it could be just sitting outside, with my dogs and watching the birds go to the bird feeder. So I think whatever those things are that kind of help you to reset, I've learned that, and it's kind of through reading too, that, our brain is like a whiteboard. And, we try to keep everything in our brain, but if we, a whiteboard, eventually the whiteboard gets full. And the way you help to clear it out so that you reset to be fresh for whatever tasks you need to do personally, professionally, whatever, is to take a break. And taking a break for me means I need to turn off my phone. I might need to turn off TV. I just maybe have music in the background, but there's not words blaring at me. So it's just something that helps me to reset, and I start to feel I'm getting ideas again. So those are the things that work for me.
I also feel if I'm getting overwhelmed or whatever, I live in Michigan, so when there's good weather, getting outside and getting some fresh air and going for a walk, and even in the winter, that can be good as well. Helps clear that mind. And Also, doing something that I love, picking time where you take a vacation. And on that vacation, you really, truly try to disconnect from some of the other things. That's really helpful as too, if you take a week or even if it's a week-long weekend or something and totally disconnect. I think that can be very helpful as well.
I was gonna say staycations. 'Cause I have the full-time job and then the adjunct stuff at San Jose State. So it takes me I really need a week-long vacation because it takes me a couple days to forget, after a couple days, I forget the name of my admin assistant and I'm speaking with seeds into the background and I can start to enjoy my life. But obviously I can't take week-long vacations as long as I would like, as often as I would like. So staycations, those long weekend trips that are, with a short drive away are really good. And, if I can't do that, I will tell you that my two day trips or even just a couple of hours at the beach. Fortunately, we live, the beach is about 30 to 40 minutes away from my house, so we can just jump in to the car and spend a couple hours there. And with the wind and the waves, it's just very relaxing just to sit there or walk along the beach. And the other thing is swimming. So we live relatively close to the public pool, the community pool, and so just floating in the water and the pool is extremely relaxing for me.
I love the sound of water, so I get that.
Yeah. But I do have to say that one of the things that I had to do was I also review for Hornbook magazine. And so during the pandemic, they were out of the office, so they started sending everything digital. And so the problem that I have is I have a young family. I've got a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And then I've got these 2 jobs that are taking a lot of my time. So I was finding it hard to come home, work a little bit on San Jose State or San Diego County office stuff, and then, oh yes, I'm going to pull up my laptop and read, the new Jandy Nelson novel that's 500 pages long. It's I can't do it. So I had to have a conversation with them. It's not the volume, it's the device. I can't send that message to my kids, right? But when I'm home, I'm always going to be stuck in front of a computer because that's the wrong message to send to them. I don't want that. It's not the right work-life balance, and it's sending the wrong message about the importance of the computer and the devices and everything. So,
and it's hard on the eyes too.
It's hard. I got these blue light glasses.
Same.
I got a new prescription. I was trying everything I did. And finally, I just broke down and I said, I am such a bad reviewer. I'm late on everything, but I came clean. I said, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And they were very gracious and said, no problem. We can reach out to the publishers and have them send you physical copies. So I said, thank you.
That's great.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jandy gets reviewed in the January, February issue instead of the November, December issue.
There you go.
With apologies to Jandy.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Becky, Jonathan, and Kathy. We had a really very stimulating conversation. I hope this has had a positive impact on everyone who hears it and gives everyone plenty of insight into your world of the school library science to the library community.
And remember, new episodes coming out once a month if we stay on schedule. So thanks for joining us. Thank you to the panel members for being part of us today.
And thank you to the San Jose State University iSchool. And join us next time for the Information Gone Wild podcast, where we discuss all things library science. And as Paul said, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure you don't miss the next one. Have a great day.